Are we streaming yet, Cornelia?
Yes, we are. We are live now.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead.
Okay, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Education Joint Committee. My name is Councillor Kanwaljit Kaur Nagpal, and as it's the council side turn to chair, I'm going to be chairing tonight's meeting. So firstly, do we have any apologies for absence? Councillor Shaw has given his apologies to me.
And we have apologies from the union side, Amanda Calver.
Thank you.
From the NEU.
Any urgent matters?
Not that I'm aware of, Chair. You're going to deal with the other first substantive item separately, aren't you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any matters to be considered in private? Any declarations of interest? Okay, item 5, minutes of the last meeting.
Okay, approved.
Sorry, Lawrence, were you going to come in at this point? Is Lawrence with us?
He was.
Yes, I believe Lawrence is in the meeting.
Okay. Lawrence, are you going to speak on Tamara's behalf about the changes to the minutes? Okay, Julie's got her hand up. Over to you, Julie.
I was going to come in for Lawrence. I'm not sure whether there's a problem with his microphone yet. Tamara has asked for some just additions or tweaks to the minutes. She was referring to the lower demand for primary reception places being due to a combination of factors such as lower birth rates, Brexit and COVID. So she just wanted that noted. And the other change was the officer confirmed that there are no planned closures and the LA is working with schools to reduce planned admission numbers where appropriate. So that was the second amendment. And then in the next paragraph, where we were talking about the low rate of retention for some secondary schools, and she'd added a bit to that sentence, which reads, in particular areas, as a high number of children travel to secondary schools outside the borough, therefore the impact on secondary as lower primary numbers move through will be dampened. And the council was working with these schools to build resilience. So those were the amendments. And I know that Lawrence is going to pick up on this item later on.
Thank you, Julie. Are we happy to do the amendments? Can I get someone to just say agreed? Because at the moment,
Agreed.
Everyone's just nodding at me. Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, item 6. So this is the terms of reference and membership. Now, I've actually been asked by Democratic Services to defer this item because there's no report, and normally if you're going to change the terms of reference and membership, you would have a report to go with it. Now, I just want to raise it briefly because I guess I just want to get everyone's views, and if we want to change the terms of reference, then it's worth getting a report ready for the next meeting. But if we don't want to do that, then we don't need to go down that route. The proposed terms of reference that you have before you on the agenda, this came about because Mandy and I met and we spoke about the fact that at the last meeting we had attendance from Unison, and issues relating to support staff were raised at the last meeting, and so that's where this comes from. And ultimately, it's up for us to decide if we want to change the terms of reference or not. Support staff are represented at the Trade Union Forum and also at the Council and Trade Union Joint Committee, and members attend that meeting as well. So I guess if there are any views, I'd welcome them now. I can't see any hands up.
No, my hand would be up. I'm struggling to find my electronic hand for some reason, but there you go.
Mandy.
So yeah, so I Councillor Nagpal and I and Julie met over this, and I think it will just reflect better the realities of the education workforce now, because when the terms of reference were set, it was more about teachers, because there wasn't really the same appreciation of the whole of the education workforce that there is now. So I think it's important that everybody's represented in terms of the union side of things. So it's not just the NEU or the NESWT or ASCL or the NAHT or the other teacher and sort of head teacher unions. It does need to be support staff as well. So I think it's important that we do go forward with this, but I'm happy to see what Democratic Services produce in terms of guidance as well.
Okay, thank you. Stefan, you've got your hand up.
Yes, although Mandy has said virtually everything I wanted to, was going to say. I think the terms of reference in EJC probably go back to the 1970s, and in the 70s and even the early 80s, support staff. Well, there wasn't support staff. There was a few office staff in reception, but since then, a large proportion of the workforce in schools is indeed support staff. And if you look at the number of levels of support staff in special schools, it's more than it is with teachers. So in terms of the democratic process, it is principally the right thing to do to involve Unison. That also includes the GMB, although they're not that involved at a local level, but formally they should also be included. Even though they're unlikely, based on our experiences, even though they're unlikely to attend, I think they should also be included.
Thank you, Stefan. Are there any other views on this?
Chair, it's Mark. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Mark.
Trying to see if my video will work, and it doesn't seem to want to. Oh, it does. Well, there's a couple of things. Firstly, although they have very seldom attended, as far as I'm aware, ASCL and the NEHT are also members of this committee. That's as far as I'm aware. I know they haven't attended for a long time, but they are members. So my view would be they would need to be consulted. Even if they don't, choose to turn up, and then of course there'd also need to be a consultation with the support staff unions to see what their views were. But in that order, I think it would also be incumbent upon us that if we decided there was any need to change this constitution, that it should be.
Mark, your connection is very weak. We're only hearing
After consulting both the head teachers associations,
Mark, we're losing you.
And the NHT, and of course we've also got
Mark.
Paulette here from
we didn't catch most of that, Mark, because you're cutting in and out.
From the NAS, and I don't want to put Paulette on the spot.
Mark, as I missed most of what you said, it's kind of hard for you to put me on the spot for me to respond.
Sorry, I'll just ask Mark if you can repeat that. I wonder if it might be easier You did just switch your camera off. Sometimes I find if I switch it off,
That was
it
what I
works.
wanted to say,
You
Chair.
get my audio across better.
Mark, I don't know if you can hear us. We've been trying to say we're not, your connection is a bit intermittent. We couldn't get the audio very well.
Mark, do you want to just repeat what you said, please? I think Mark's disappeared. Okay, are there any other, anybody else want to come in?
Okay, can you hear me
Yes.
now?
Not very well, Mark.
I believe I can
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Please go ahead, Mark. Thank you.
Mark, I wonder if it's worth you just going out and coming back in, and I'll just let someone else come in. Anyone else who wants to contribute? Stefan, you've got your hand up.
I think I knew what Mark was trying to say, even though I only heard.
Well, we'll let Mark come back and say what he wants.
But when he says it, we agree.
Okay, so can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes. Go ahead, Mark. Okay, we can't hear you, Mark. No, we can't hear you, Mark. Does anybody else want to come in at this stage? Otherwise, I mean, I'm getting the Stefan.
I believe what Mark was trying to say is that the NHT and our school should be consulted first, and we agree with that, and then go to Unison and the GMB. I think that's the essence of what Mark was trying to say, and I think he's right. Okay, so I think on the basis of what I've heard, we will bring a report to the next meeting. Oh, Mark's here. Mark, do you want to come in and just, we can see you now as well.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Trying to say that the other two, the head teacher associations should also be asked about their view in terms of a change of the constitution of this committee, even though they haven't attended for some while. And then subject to what they thought and the NASUWT, it would then be appropriate to go to the support staff unions and seek their views. And I was thinking that that's the kind of consultation process you'd probably want to go down before any report came back.
We've lost you again, Mark.
Can you still hear me?
You're coming in and out, Mark.
Okay, I'm not quite sure what to do.
Well, I mean, I think we've agreed that we are going to have a report come to this committee, and so let's just we'll do the consultation and then we'll bring a report back. I just wanted to get a feel really for whether we should go ahead and do that work, and it seems like everyone does agree that we should have the support, the other unions such as Unison and GMB. So we'll carry on with that. Okay, on to item 7. So item 7 is council side updates, which Mark is going to cover.
Hopefully. So I've got to ask, can you all still hear me? Because most of you are frozen on my screen.
We can hear you now, Mark.
Okay. I'll go through the various items. So the first one was about the HR services to schools, and it was just a reminder to all that we will shortly be updating our brochure for schools for services for 2022-23. There's a timetable which will see the revised service level agreement for HR services go to schools late in February for them to make a decision. Obviously, we're very keen to ensure we retain and possibly increase business. Although only just recently we did get news from one school that they were going to cease using our services and use the services of another HR provider, which is very unfortunate. The other issue is for us about what kind of increase to our charges there may be. And we tend to link those to easily justifiable increases relating to the pay of staff and relating to any other increases that we have to encounter. So, for example, next year, employers' NI contribution rates will be going up. And although the pay award for support staff hasn't been agreed because the trade unions on the support staff side are considering industrial action, we could still bet that at worst, I suppose if you're someone who's a recipient of the award, at worst, we're going to get 1.75%, possibly something a little bit more. So we also have to be able, when we go to schools, to confirm what our charges for the new year will be, and also confirm the rationale behind any increase in charges. So really that was to just bring to people's attention that we're actually going through that process again. We go through it annually, and we are ever hopeful that we'll retain all of our business and possibly attract a bit more. Although, as I did say, that has been tempered a little because we do know we're going to lose at least one school. I'll stop at that point and see if anyone has any questions.
Can't see any hands up yet. Are there any questions for Mark?
I can see everyone nodding. That's a good sign though, because it does mean now that I've actually got visibility of movement on the screen, so that's good. Okay, so the next item was management of absence guidance. This is a updated or revised version of our management of absence guidance for schools. We actually started the review pre-pandemic, would you believe? And as you probably may understand, it got set to one side because of the pandemic. So we've resurrected it, notwithstanding we've still got issues around the pandemic. We met with the trade unions last week and we're now considering their final comments, and hopefully that will be published in the next week or so. And by published, I mean it will become available for schools to use. So I'm sure they'll find that welcome because it's long overdue that we updated that guidance, the management of absence guidance. Again, I'll stop to see if anyone's got any comments.
Sorry, yeah, and me as well, sorry.
Okay, so Mandy, you go first.
Okay, I mean, I think the thing with absence policies is just trying to work out exactly how it gets triggered, because and I think this on two levels really, from a sort of disabled educators' perspective, that sometimes I think that disabled educators get penalised because, you know, they're undergoing a kind of regime of appointments for whatever it is, whether it's cancer treatment or whatever, and then that can trigger absence stuff. And also, I think with the emergence of long COVID, we're all going to have to review how we treat that absence as well, because we've got to be mindful of the Equality Act in terms of, you know, there's an unfair impact often on disabled people of absence policies, so we need to be to be clear about that in terms of its sort of equality impact. So and I think it's worthwhile trying to review that now, because there are more and more educators who have got long COVID, and although it's a moot point at the moment whether or not that is counting as a full disability, I think unfortunately that it will do in the next year or so, because the effect on their day-to-day activities will be significant over that longer period of time. So that's just what I wanted to point out around absence.
Stefan?
Following on with the point that Mandy made well about long COVID, the NEU is looking for some test cases to take to court and employment tribunals around long COVID, i.e. whether people get dismissed because of long COVID, whether it should be considered under the 2010 Equality Act, and also what is also a contentious point, not just in Ealing, but everywhere I would imagine, but certainly in West London and neighbouring local authorities, is whether the Green Book and Burgundy Book for support staff and teachers should apply for staff getting full pay, as it explicitly says in those terms and conditions books, which is not being applied, not just in Ealing, but it's not being applied anywhere. And so the NEU is looking to take an example or a couple of test cases to call and employment tribunals on those particular issues that Mandy and I just raised. I have one, that's for people's information. So we are looking for good cases to take nationally. Mark, I have a question for you, since I was part of that discussion that we had. Thank you very much. We all made a number of comments. Do you think we will be happy with the final outcome and the comments that we made, and whether they've been taken on board or not?
We're going to consider the comments you made, I think, at a meeting tomorrow. I can't guarantee we'll take on board every comment made, but I think that the document is an improvement on the guidance we had anyway. It is guidance, by the way, it's not a policy, it's deliberately only guidance, because there's no part of the guidance that's like a formal policy. We tend to find, so I think you'll be pleased that we will take on board some of the comments that you've made. I think that's the best way for me to describe it. Can I just pick up on some of Mandy's points? I think we do mention disability and the way in which employers, including schools, should consider people with disabilities when they consider how to manage absence. So I think we reference that quite a lot in the guidance. But the only thing I can't say, Mandy, is whether it will be adopted by schools that don't buy HR services from Ealing, because a number of schools may decide that their own guidance or policies are better. So I can't guarantee that we'll pick it. On the issue of long COVID, we've got a meeting that we're going to pencil in with local trade unions next week to discuss some issues around how schools deal with trying to get people who have suffered from long COVID back into the workplace. That will include colleagues here. Hopefully, Stefan, it will include you. So we're looking to see how best we can support people who've suffered from long COVID to get back into the workplace. I think that's it.
I don't think there are any other questions, Mark, so please carry on.
Okay, my last item was on redeployment arrangements. And basically, the council already provides access to its vacancies to school staff who are under notice of redundancy. So the council already does that for schools. What the council asked some time back is whether schools would reciprocate. So would schools allow their vacancies to be considered for any council staff facing redundancy? I did a long round of discussions with head teacher quadrant colleagues and asked if they would, and put together some principles for them to consider and some process guidelines. What we've got is we've got 41 schools signed up who've said they would participate in such a scheme. And the scheme will be operational from at some point early next year. There's no need for it to be operational at the moment because the council doesn't have any staff who are potentially redundant or under notice of redundancy. So there isn't a need for it now. I think one thing I did want to point out to colleagues as well is it does not include teachers. We don't think that schools should be putting their teaching vacancies up for redeployees in the council. And that's because we do not have, to the best of our knowledge, a large swathe of qualified teachers amongst our workforce. If ever there was a teacher who or a qualified teacher in the council workforce who was facing redundancy, we would consult with schools as and when that arose. Another thing just to say is what has been raised by trade union colleagues in the past is it's great that we've got some kind of arrangement between schools and the council and schools. But one thing that has been asked is about whether or not we can try and develop that into school-on-school redeployment. And that's something that I will take back to heads in the coming months. I'm not quite certain how or if that will curry favour amongst them, but it's something that I'm certainly prepared to explore. So yeah, early in the new year, hopefully we'll get the arrangement up and running, and it's good that we've now got just over 40 schools agreeing to participate in that reciprocal arrangement. That's it from me, Chair. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Stefan's got his hand up.
Just to say that's impressive, and we welcome that news and your comments, Mark. Thank you. That's encouraging. It must have taken quite a bit of work to get to that stage.
It did.
Are there any other questions for Mark? Okay, I can't see any indications, Mark, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
So item 8, this is a union side item. So who's going to present on this?
I am, and then others will contribute, Chair. Cornelia, can I have share screen, please? I don't, or access to screen share, or is that already available? Cornelia?
Yes, go ahead, Stefan. Go ahead. You should be able to do that now.
Thank you. So this isn't the first time that we put workload on the agenda. It's certainly not even the second or even probably the third time over the last 4 or 5 years that we put workload on the agenda. So why are we putting it back on the agenda again? In London, the average, more than half of the NEU membership for teachers is under the age of 35. Nationally, 50% of teachers will leave the profession within 5 years, never to return. And since the last time that we have raised workload, there has been a very comprehensive survey about workload, which was reported in the TES, that said that for teachers, and I'm pretty sure that this applies to support staff too, that teachers who are finding this difficult in terms of stress, in terms of their workload, and find their job demanding and overwhelming, and those words are not, those are the words that have been typically used by teachers, has gone up from 74% to 81% in the last year. And all unions, head teacher unions, supports unions, classroom teaching unions, are talking about a recruitment retention crisis. And so since we've last raised it, workload has gone up by 5%. So 4 out of 5 teachers are struggling to keep on top of the workload. They're suffering from stress, and many of them are leaving the profession, which is why more than 50% of the workforce in London is under the age of 35. If you compare the UK, and I do mean Scotland and Northern Ireland as well, that and compare our stress, as we called it, to other OECD countries, we are a staggering 2 times greater than any. So teachers in the UK are 2 times greater to be suffering from workload and stress and work-related stress than any other OECD country. And that's why we have put it on the agenda unapologetically, because this is destroying the profession, because there won't be teachers at that rate. So in terms of sharing screen, I want to put this on now. Thank you very much, Cornelia. Hopefully everyone can see this. So I'm going to scroll up to the top, and just this is for people's awareness, but it's the question I think you can all guess. So this is a rebranding of something that we've done in 2016 and worked with the DfE, and the DfE gave guidance in terms of reducing workload. But since that 2016, we've come up with a new branding for the same issue. And that's what it's called. It's called Value Education, Value Educators. And if I scroll down to the checklist, I'd like everyone to be aware. So this is the guidance that is going out, and I can do the checklist. Bear with me. Sorry for your eyes screaming through this. So we're here. So we are urging all our schools to look at these following points, and whether this is NEU guidance or statutory guidance, to do an audit in their school to see how much they can tick these boxes and how much they cannot tick these boxes. And therefore to look at some of the strongest points in their that affect them in terms of their workloads, whether it's lesson plans, data collection, report writing, meetings, the number of meetings, directed time, appraisal, PPA time. As I said, some of this should be statutory guidance, and it isn't something that we should be having to talk to head teachers about, because this is statutory and head teachers are supposed to. But you'll be surprised that since the summer term and up till now, large numbers of schools still have not produced a directed time calendar for their schools. And where we have raised this, 2-3 hours or an hour and a half have been taken off. And if that means that you get home half an hour earlier every day, or 20 minutes earlier every day for the whole of the week, that's a lot of time. And those small gains are starting to add up. But what is shocking is that there's a number of schools that do not have a directed time calendar that are over the statutory 1265 hours. So whether this is NEU policy, or whether this is statutory guidance, we are asking our schools to look through all of these areas to see whether their schools are compliant with this or not. And we're doing this to ensure that workload is reduced in our schools. And we do this because if we do not reduce workload significantly, then the turnover of teachers is going to become greater and greater, and that will be to the detriment of children. And so my question is, and we have asked this on a number of different ways, what is it that Ealing Local Authority or we can do collectively, jointly, to work together in order to reduce the workload in schools? What can we do together to ensure that the stress and the work-related stress and the increasing workload is actually going downwards rather than going upwards? At the moment, it is going upwards according to all the surveys, and that's my open-ended question. What what can we do together to reduce this? Finish.
Thank you, Stefan. I was just wondering at this point if any of the officers want to come in before I take any questions. Julie?
Yeah, I have some hands up before mine, but I just want to say that improving and not proving is high on our partnership agenda, the ELP agenda. We are working very hard at the moment to refine our high challenge, low threat school-to-school support models. So with an emphasis on peer learning and inquiry rather than mock inspections, as you phrased it in your document. We're learning a lot from Nordic models of system improvement, and we're trialing some different approaches at the moment to building what we call growth cultures in schools. So it's very high on the ELP agenda, and we also have a dedicated co-led committee, the Recruitment and Retention Committee, and they are looking explicitly at how we can attract, develop and retain the best teachers in Ealing, looking very hard at pathways and progression, and particularly for our Black and Asian staff. It would be interesting to have some Ealing stats rather than kind of broad national and London stats. We're asking the Recruitment and Retention Committee to think about what kind of indicators, what kind of success measures would we want to see as a partnership for 2023. So some of those things that you've described are very high on our agenda too.
Thanks, Julie. Who else has got their hand up? Councillor Rice?
Thank you, Chair. Because one thing that's really been highlighted to me recently is that obviously the fact that, a lot of teachers are probably now having a chance to sit and reflect and realising how much stress and pressure they've been under because of COVID and the incredible workload that they just had to handle then. It's just so admirable how teachers got through all of that. But just wondering just how much of that do you think is actually relevant to what we're discussing here, and how much of that is something that maybe is something that we have more control over? Because I'm just trying to look and see if it's something that, if there are issues going on at the moment that we might find in the long term, if we manage the situation properly, that we might be able to come out from. So just wondering just how much maybe it is actually influenced by the COVID situation. Thank you.
Matt, you've got your hand up.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I just wanted to add on just a couple of points that Stefan raised, and just stress a couple of other points. I think, firstly, just to pick up on Councillor Rice's point, workloads in schools is an issue that predates COVID and is still here. So I think a big reason why the union is taking this orientation is actually workload is one of the top 2, 3, probably the biggest issue amongst our members. So that's why we're taking it, even though COVID might have exacerbated a lot of it. And as Councillor Rice correctly said, a lot of us are taking time to reflect on actually how difficult the past year and a half has been, and continues to be, actually, with the new variant now on the horizon. I just also wanted to point out, so just to add to Stefan's statistic on 50% of teachers leaving within 3 years, that's something that's been ongoing. Anecdotally, I see it in my school, and speaking to other colleagues in Ealing. I acknowledge it's anecdotal, but it is pretty obvious on the ground. There's a high turnover every year. I think the average in London for schools is 25% turnover every year. So that indicates something is driving teachers out of schools, at least in London. And I think as well, the workload and stress we're discussing here is not related to the children or managing children. Yes, we have difficult children, difficult classes, but we sign up to that. That's our job. A lot of us take a lot of pride in doing what we can to help them. But what we find most difficult, what we find most challenging, is actually not related to children to the classroom. It is the unnecessary admin work, the spectre of Ofsted, particularly. I know at Twyford and Greenford are two schools which have been the longest, at least among secondary schools, been longest since their last inspection. So it's something we're really anxious about as well. And I know that, and I'm sure it's the same at Greenford. So these are the factors that actually are affecting us. I think if you look at it, if you're talking about admin, talking about inspections, I do welcome that. I think it was Julie's point around peer-to-peer support rather than mocking inspections. That's something I definitely welcome. This is what's driving workload up, because we don't feel like we're really doing our job. We don't feel like we're professionals. Actually, we're here to teach kids. We're teachers or we're educators, and it's the stuff that's not related directly to the children that's actually giving us most stress. And that's that links to much of what Stefan said earlier. So I just wanted to add on that. And I think as well, school budgets being tightened, underfunding for over a decade now, has actually exacerbated all the issues I've discussed and raised, and we've raised actually. So I just wanted to highlight those issues. So yes, thank you, Chair. Finished there.
Councillor Milliken.
Yeah, thank you, Cam, for that, Councillor Nagpal, for that. Two questions, really. One to Stefan and one perhaps to officers. To Stefan, I noticed the title of the report, and all you did was flash through it, so I'll be interested to read it, actually, but you just flashed through it. But the title was Reducing Accountability, and that did intrigue me as to whether you're proposing, or the NEU is proposing, there should be reduced accountability by teachers, which seems a kind of an odd thing, really. But anyway, so perhaps a question for Stefan. And the question for officers, maybe around turnover, because clearly that is a hard measure, or a way of measuring this. Now, obviously, not every person who leaves a school leaves because of turnover. They leave for all sorts of reasons. They may move because they're married to somebody who's moved to the other end of the country. I know that's happened. With some frequency and so on. So there are a number of things for that, but maybe officers are able to, and I have to say, and I'm involved with a number of schools, I'm not aware that any of them have anything like 25% turnover per annum, which is what we just heard. So I'd be interested to know what the stats are on people leaving because of workload.
I respond, Chair. You're muted. Okay.
Sorry, Stefan and then Julie, please.
One of the things at the moment that unites all of the teaching unions and professions, including the head teachers ones, is that Ofsted are coming in right here, right now, when we're still trying to recover from the COVID. And the NHT and ASCL, as well as ourselves, are saying, why is Ofsted coming in right now? And it's causing stress. You may have seen in the newspaper articles, teachers saying, I can cope with this, I can cope with that, but head teachers, but I can't cope with another Ofsted inspection, therefore I'm leaving. And then when that was put on social media, that went viral because everybody said that they knew it. So when we talk about reduced accountability, it's the exam factory culture that the UK has got. Because if you look at the PISA results, and Julie referred to it in terms of the Nordic countries, in particular Finland, they have a low accountability because they're trusted as professionals, as teachers. And yet, in terms of the PISA rankings, and we still have criticism of PISA, but nonetheless, Finland and other countries do so much better. Whilst our children, and even the CBI are now complaining about this, that our children are fed a diet of rote learning in order to pass exam after exam after exam. And the extra stress is what Matt talked about. It's not teaching in the classroom, that's the bit that we love. What all the extra work is for is making the school accountable to Ofsted. And we keep asking Ofsted, can you demonstrate that you have raised standards? And when we ever ask Ofsted, can you demonstrate that your interventions have raised standards? They say no. So that we need a different accountability system that is not Ofsted, because Ofsted is clearly no longer fit for purpose. It's been around for 30 years, and its standards, even by that narrow mark, have not improved at all. And everybody jumps to the drumbeat of Ofsted. Local authorities talk to head teachers talk to staff, and it's all about the exams and not about actual learning. And the Americans have got an expression which says that the learning environment of the children is the working conditions of the staff. And so schools should be held accountable to their communities. Absolutely. We all agree on that. But this isn't being held accountable in terms of the education system. This is being held accountable to exams. And exams are one indicator of whether educational progress has been made in students. But we are now teaching to an exam. And the CBI, all of us are saying this is wrong to teach to an exam. And we need to be able to have more than that. And that's why Britain is so much higher on recall and rote learning rather than an actual deep understanding of the subject, which this country needs.
Julie.
Yes, so just coming back to David's, Councillor Milliken's ask about staff turnover, and I don't know whether Mark can chip in here too, but on a healthy note, and we're looking at Ealing schools here, I think one of the really positive signs is that if you start your career here in Ealing, then you'll stay in Ealing. And I think, and I have to check the statistic, but the last time I looked, 98% of our early careers teachers continue their career in Ealing schools. So there is something going well here in terms of how our early careers teachers are supported, how they're guided, and how they're motivated. And when you talk to teachers about what it is that motivates them to stay in the profession, it is access to really high quality networks, professional development, and being part of a social system that's about improving children's lives and improving learning for children. And I think we should keep those things at the heart of what we can do locally, what's in our gift to do, notwithstanding the much bigger debate around how the education system is constructed in this country. I think we should need to think about what we can do locally to keep that focus on our children and our staff, and to make them want to stay here. And of course, we know that there are factors beyond those listed by Stefan that lead to some teachers leaving in their 3rd to 5th year, that are to do with affordable housing, for example. So these are some of the things that we can think about locally.
Councillor Rice, did you want to come back?
Yes, please, Chair. Can I do some clarify? I mean, I do welcome those figures from Julie about how those educators who begin their careers in Ealing continue their careers in Ealing. I'm just wondering, is that just simply those that remain in teaching, or are there others that begin their careers in Ealing but then maybe go on and leave teaching and then go on to start other careers? Because I'm not quite sure how what that means. But yeah, just sorry, just to put a clarification, please.
No, these are teachers who start their careers in Ealing and stay in Ealing into their 2nd and into their 3rd year. And I'm happy to check the accuracy of my stats and add that to the minutes.
That would be great. Thank you, Julie. Matt.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm actually grateful for Julie's intervention there, because I was going to pick up on Councillor Milliken's query around because the 25% was the statistic I quoted. So that's London-wide, and actually in my experience that does seem to be low in Ealing schools, and Julie confirmed it. Just to pick up on one point though, because I think Julie mentioned it's teachers staying on into their 2nd and 3rd year. We're actually talking about within 5 years, and actually it's retention that's just as much of a problem as recruitment. It's good that Ealing has taken steps to recruit early careers teachers and supporting them and clearly the feedback's been positive. But the concern is as you stay on, as you become quote unquote more expensive, that's when there's an extra pinch there. So I'm just wondering what the council are doing to consider holding on to the more experienced teachers, because the OECD have shown the UK to be one of the youngest professions in all OECD countries. I think in 2013, the average age for teachers was 39. That's continued to go down. So I do wonder what we're doing as well to keep experienced teachers. So not only obviously children will benefit from their experience and wisdom and expertise, but also the younger members of staff and newer members of staff who can be mentored and trained and taken care of by them, because the entire school community would benefit. So I'll be really interested to hear if there is something that in place for that, or if there are ideas. So that'll be a question I would pose. Yeah, finish. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Matt. Julie, do you want to come back?
I can't respond very specifically to the point that Matt raised, although I do accept the point that you're making. I mean, as an Ealing Learning Partnership, what I can say is that in our next phase of development, which is 2021 to 2023, we're focusing very much on middle leaders, and particularly in the primary phase, and we're trying to ensure that the partnership reaches, because we think we do a lot at the sort of early careers stage and a lot at the senior leadership stage, but we recognise that the partnership needs to reach that group of teachers who very often will be at the sort of peak of their career in terms of the impact that they make in the classroom, in their sort of 5th year or so, and yet we perhaps haven't got enough professional development networks for those groups, and that may well be a major incentive to them staying in the profession. So it is a piece of work, and you should see more on this over the next 12 months, particularly in the primary phase. We already have really strong middle leadership networks in the secondary phase, and that's also one of the strengths of the partnership.
Thanks, Julie. Mark, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just two observations from me on the discussion that's just taken place. I didn't know this was going to be asked, so I couldn't look at getting any stats from our HR system about numbers of leavers, but unfortunately there's two things about that. One is 20% of our schools, or 20% of our schools workforce, aren't covered by our system because those schools choose to use another HR system or provider. So that wouldn't be a fuller picture as you'd like. And secondly, it would be raw data. It would just say to you, this number of teachers left, that number of things started. That the issue here is about why and questioning. And we've tried 3 times, at least twice, maybe 3, in the last 10 years to ask schools as our clients if they wanted to have some kind of exit interview process in place where we could collect statistics on a borough-wide basis. We didn't get anywhere with that because schools, of course, are responsible for their own recruitment and also dealing with resignations that come through the school. That's something we may be able to revisit in the ELP Recruitment and Retention Committee that Julie referenced, and certainly something that maybe at the next meeting, because I attend that committee, we could look at considering to see whether there would be some opportunity and also an opinion towards supporting some kind of exit interview data collection, because as I say, raw data won't tell you anything other than the numbers of people joining and leaving the profession. It won't tell you any more than that.
Stefan.
We would welcome what Mark was just talking about. That would be a very good thing to be able to achieve.
Yeah.
Councillor Milliken.
Yeah, just very briefly. Sorry, Gosh, yeah, just very briefly. I mean, I'm involved in a number of schools, and all of them do effectively what you might call an exit interview. And as a governor, we ask, well, why have 2 staff left this year or whatever it is? And we're told, you know, whatever it is. So that does go on. I'm sure it doesn't just happen in schools where I'm involved. I'm sure it happens in most schools where somebody leaves, that you find out why.
Paulette, you've got your hand up.
I was just thinking, wouldn't it make more sense for us to be able to collate all of those exit interviews if the schools give permission for us to use that information, so we can look at the reasonings behind why staff are leaving and what we can do to make circumstances better for staff so that we don't have such a huge turnover. I know I've been very silent, but I've been listening and taking in a lot of what's been said. I myself can speak from personal experience that workload is a massive retention issue within schools, especially for those schools that are pushing to retain their outstanding. It's all about making sure that the curriculum is sequenced right, that the paperwork's in the right place, and you still got to teach as well. And you're still teaching you still got intervention, you're still teaching, encouraging those students that have missed a lot during the COVID pandemic to catch up on things that they've missed, to be at a place where they should have been maybe 6 or 7 months ago. They should be there. We're trying to pull them there now, but it's taken its toll on people in many different ways and forms. And it's difficult sometimes when you're inside a school and the focus is not so much on staff well-being, but the children's well-being. If the staff are not well, how do they expect them to be able to teach? The kids are going to suffer either which way. So we've got to start looking at information and the ways in which we can help teachers to help the kids. That's it. Rant over.
Thank you, Paulette. I can't see any other hands up, so shall we move on to the next item, which is item 9? And this is also a union side item. Who's going to speak on this one?
I will, Chair.
Okay, over to you, Stefan.
So, part of this was answered in the correction to the minutes when we raised this. So we would welcome an expansion on what was actually said or what is actually planned. And whilst I don't represent secondary head teachers, I have had informal conversations with head teachers, secondary head teachers, and they're very keen to hear the answers to this because they share their concerns with the NEU, at least on a private level. And if ASGL were here in this meeting, I'm very confident they would agree with us on a formal level, but they're not here. So I can only say that I've been also speaking about this at an informal level with secondary head teachers. So Ada Lovelace and Ealing Fields and Arc Sloan are all now up and running and starting to expand. And at the moment, and in the summer, I was doing 8, 9, possibly 10 restructurings, and there might have been a few more that I wasn't involved with. And we know the reasons why. That's COVID, which wasn't foreseeable. Brexit, which may or may not have been foreseeable. What is dubbed social cleansing in terms of people having to go outside of London because the rents are cheaper outside of London than they are inside. That has caused, that combination of factors has caused a dip. So in Birmingham, there's 11% drop in roles, and in London, there's a 9% drop in roles this year, and was last year. And that dip's going to go through the primary sector and then hit the secondary sector when Ada Lovelace, Arc Sohn, and Ealing in particular will then be at full capacity. So we've got less numbers. And when I've asked this in the past, and it was partly said here again, that quite a lot of pupils who live in the borough go to schools outside of the borough. And that's true. But that has also been true for a long period of time. And I do not want, and I'm sure Paulette for the NSUWT none of us want to be in a position where we're looking at redundancies and restructurings in secondary schools in 5 or 6 year time when that dip hits year 7. It was very unpleasant to have to do it in primary schools, and that is still ongoing, or I've been warned that there is still more to come. So I acknowledge that we couldn't have predicted COVID, for example, but we've got 5 years, maybe 6 years before this dip goes into the secondary schools, and the secondary schools will all be fighting. So there'll be more secondary schools fighting for less pupils. And that is clearly a restructuring redundancy scenario, which we share with the secondary heads in terms of the impact that that's actually going to have. So you did talk about how you're going to mitigate or reduce this. It takes a long time for these plans to get embedded and get in place. And we are keen, as I'm sure all of the profession is keen to know locally what is going to be done. It's not just going to affect here, it's going to affect London and elsewhere. But is this something that is being discussed? If it is being discussed, we would like to be involved in it, as I'm sure Paulette would like to be involved in it as well, in order to avoid that or to find ways to mitigate that. Whilst it is true that secondary schools we should find ways that secondary schools should encourage and find ways for those who go out of the borough to come back into the borough. That's true, but it hasn't changed the numbers going out of the borough so far. And so there isn't any, whilst we can hope that more in the borough will stay in the borough, that's been a constant number, or a relatively constant number, so I'm informed, but please correct me if I'm wrong. If it's been a constant number or a relatively constant number for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, it's reasonable to assume that's going to be a constant number in the future. And therefore, Haringey at the moment, which is where I live in Tottenham, is shutting down schools as we speak. And that's the biggest concern, that we've got too many schools and not enough pupils. And so please do expand upon what was mentioned in the minutes right at the very beginning of this meeting.
Lawrence, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, so I think, as you said, you covered the background to the falling numbers of primary phase. At secondary phase, there's just a 2% surplus this year, concentrated in 2 schools. Numbers have improved in one of those schools, and there's a planned redevelopment of that site, which should also help there. For the other school, the Academy Trust is working with the community engagement to raise standards and the popularity of that school, and that's due an Ofsted inspection in this school year, and there's a good confidence about the outcome of that. You mentioned Ealing is historically a net exporter of students at secondary phase, and it has been. We now have 9 Ofsted outstanding schools and 5 Ofsted good schools, and those replacement ratios have actually been rising, and that net outmigration has reduced from 25% to 17%. So there's been improvement on that. So in terms of monitoring those figures, that's an ongoing task that is reported to Cabinet annually. It's, as we know, very difficult to predict very far into the future because of changes such as Brexit and COVID and birth rates cycles. But the team use a number of statistics sources to keep an ongoing eye on that and to report it through, and to work with schools to manage the roles where they look like they'll be affected.
Thank you, Lawrence. Are there any other questions or contributions? Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this whole situation does seem to be really quite concerning, because I mean, I've known probably for a little while that they've had lower numbers of children going into primary schools, and it's always been in the back of my mind thinking, well, what exactly is the knock-on effect with the secondary schools? But at the same time, we've had planning applications go through to build new secondary schools in Ealing, and I've actually been on the planning committee, and I've actually myself been involved in giving planning permission in those instances. But it was just that, I mean, what exactly was the long-term thought behind this? Because did we really need those secondary schools built at all? I mean, I would just love to understand a bit more about this situation, how we got here. Thank you.
So I mentioned that this year the surplus was only 2%. Without those places at those schools, that there wouldn't have been sufficient places for the cohort this year, and that is certainly projected in the short term. In the longer term, as I mentioned, it's much harder to predict where the numbers will be. The replacement ratios have significantly improved, and if that continues, then that will mitigate the effect of the fall in primary numbers at secondary phase.
Stefan?
I mean, that's good that it's gone from 25% to 17%, but that reduction, and even if that reduction keeps going lower, and as you said yourself, Lawrence, that might mitigate the numbers, but I haven't heard how we're going to reverse. It still, unless I've misunderstood, but forgive me for pushing back a little bit harder, we still seem to be heading in 5 years' time when that dip in primary schools hits secondary schools, and the secondary schools have increased. So Ada Lovelace is Ada Lovelace has now got up to year 8, or is it year 9? So in a few years' time, Ada Lovelace will have pupils coming in year 7, year 8, year 9, year 10, year 11. Art Sloan is just about to start letting pupils come in. So whatever mitigation that you've just talked about, isn't that going to be swallowed up by the fact that we've still got more secondary schools? And if we've got more secondary schools, even if the numbers coming back are in, that might have been enough to keep it as it is, but we've got new secondary schools coming online that are taking more and more pupils. So that still seems to me that whilst that might mitigate, we're still looking at redundancies and restructuring in 5 years' time. And therefore, we are keen to avoid that, and we've got time to avoid that. And I would like to find a way, we would all like to find a way, and it's not for me to speak for ASBA and the NHT, but I'm fairly confident they would be keen to help work with us as well to find a way to avoid what Haringey, for example, and other local authorities in London are doing, which is actually shutting down schools, which is a huge number of redundancies. Are we heading to, in 5 years' time, schools having to be closed? And that's potentially the worst case scenario, but that's a real possibility. I wouldn't like to put a number on that, but that appears at this moment in time to be a real possibility. And so therefore, what is our strategy? What is our plan? I know we've got mitigation factors. You've described the mitigation factors, but what is the plan to avoid redundancies and restructurings? Because we've got 5 years to prepare for that. And we would be happy to work and try and find ways to avoid that in the future.
Yes, clearly we'll continue to monitor those numbers. They are updated regularly and reported regularly, so we can liaise on those. And if there's an impact on secondary schools, we can certainly reconvene to discuss.
Okay, so I can't see any more hands up. So the next item is item number 10, which is COVID update, and this is again a union side item. He's going to present to this item.
Thank you, Chair. I asked for this because the numbers were increasing at the time, but this was before Omicron arrived in South Africa and is now already in the UK. And whilst we don't know for certain, we understand that it's twice as transmissible as the Delta variant, which was more transmissible than previous variants. And this variant has got 50 modifications to the RNA structure. So we wanted to know that we didn't, so the motivation behind putting this here is there is a sense of deja vu, because this time last year, the government was saying that schools are going to stay open and everything's okay, and SAGE and Independent SAGE and the unions were going, look, the numbers are going up, we need to do something now in order to avoid closures next in the future. We don't want school closures. If we act now, if we do something now, it will be less than if we have to do something next term. And of course, come January, this year's January, Boris Johnson was forced to close schools because nothing was done during this term. And that does feel like a bit of deja vu. So we've just heard from the Education Secretary that he thinks nativity plays should continue and that things should continue on as normal. But so there are a number of concerns, and our motivation for asking this is that if we do more now, that will help ensure that we are not in a situation where schools are forced to close next term. The other point that we wanted to raise is that if risk assessments are a legal requirement, are a statutory legal requirement, and the Omicron new variant is a significant change, significant enough even for the government to start advising people to wearing masks. So we hope that the local authority will advise all schools that they need to review their risk assessment. And we believe that's a legal requirement to review their risk assessment and to consult with all the unions, Unison, GMB, NSUWT, as well as ourselves at a school level for that. We have some other suggestions which we want to raise in terms of using FFP masks, isolation for CEV staff and pregnant staff, isolation and not to come back for close contacts with a PCR test. These are some of the suggestions that we have, but what are the plans that Ealing has, and presumably you've discussed this elsewhere across London. There is the real danger that we're going to have a repeat of last year. So what are we doing to try and avoid that?
Lawrence, do you want to respond?
Yes, thank you. So continuing to encourage people to get vaccinated that haven't been vaccinated so far, and then I think a local response plan has been drafted by Public Health and Schools Health and Safety and has been circulated for discussion, or is being circulated for discussion. Once that discussion and consultation has taken place, updates will follow for the guidance, the risk assessment, and the advice provided to parents.
Matt, you've got your hand up. Or Mark, do you want to come in at this point?
I don't mind if Matt wants. I can defer to Matt if he wants to go first.
All right, we'll let Matt go first then.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I'm glad that Lawrence raised a local response plan. So I was going to ask a little bit about that in terms of, do we have statistics to hand in terms of local infection rates, and also what kind of rates would trigger the next step in the response plan? What steps would be taken? Obviously, we've gone back to mask wearing in communal areas and corridors. I was wondering what the council's position is on mask wearing in classrooms, because I can certainly speak on behalf of myself and a number of my colleagues. It was annoying to have masks in the classroom, but I think again, certainly speaking for myself, again, I think I'm confident speaking with colleagues, we would have masks in the classrooms the next 2-3 weeks if we can avoid another lockdown and remote learning in January, because that's certainly something we want to avoid at all costs, and we're happy to sort of do our bit to prevent that. So I'm just wondering, what is the council's position on that? And is that something that's being discussed in that consultation with the local response plan?
Thank you, Matt. I think I'll let Stefan come back in and then we'll come to you, Mark.
Thank you. So I didn't feel that the question was answered. Will the local authority recommend schools to review their risk assessments? We believe that's a legal requirement because of the changes that have just happened. Will the local authority recommend the ventilation and the use of FFP2 masks? Will the local authority recommend that CEV and pregnant staff work from home? Will the local authority recommend isolation of staff who have come in close contact with someone until they've got a negative PCR? What else? I mean, I know what public health's position is, but is there something in addition to what the national guidance is, which is what I believe I've only just heard? Is there additional things that Ealing will do? Because I know that in Leicester and other places, local authorities have gone further than what the public health are saying. And will Ealing go further? At the very least, it is a legal requirement for all schools to review their risk assessment now that we've got a new variant that is significant enough for even the government to turn around and say that everyone's got to start wearing masks in corridors. We think it should be more than that. Otherwise, we might face another lockdown sometime next term. And therefore, we're asking, will Ealing do more than what just public health and the DfE are recommending in order to avoid a lockdown sometime next term, which all of us are in agreement we want to avoid?
Thanks, Stefan. We'll come to you now, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I can answer some of the issues, not all of them, and Lawrence may have to come back in on some of them. We're currently updating our staffing guidance for schools, and schools are aware of this. And when we've got our update ready, we'll share it as well with trade unions. Stefan will know that generally speaking, the guidance we issue follows the government guidance, but also locally we are mindful of advice we receive from our local public health colleagues. And if they advise that there are other measures that need to be taken over and above that which is advised by the government, then of course we'll pay due regard to that, as will schools. In terms of the staffing guidance, the two main things is the issue around Omicron and anyone who is a close contact having to isolate regardless of test results or vaccination status. That's the current guidance as far as I see it. We're also looking at updating the guidance when it comes to travel, because it may well be that a number of staff in schools are considering international travel over the Christmas break, and we want to remind them of the possible issues, risks, costs, etc., that may arise as a result of continuing with international travel. None of us can predict what it might be like in 3 weeks. We'd all like to, but we can't. On the issues Stefan mentioned about CEV and pregnant staff, Stefan will probably know that the term clinically extremely vulnerable has all but disappeared from the government guidance now. In fact, that was linked to the cessation of shielding much earlier in the year. And the government now refer to those who are at higher risk. And that covers a broad range of categories. And it would cover a broad range of categories in our schools. With regards pregnant staff, I think our staffing guidance is already very heavily weighted in favour of ensuring protection of that particular group. And we've made no bones about it. And we are very keen to ensure that pregnant women understand the issues for them in continuing at work, that there are proper risk assessments undertaken at stages during their pregnancy, that they react and respond to advice they receive from their clinician about working or continuing to work, particularly in the third trimester. And we've also pointed out the guidance now that pregnant women should consider taking up the vaccination. And we've provided links to the government guidance in support of that. So I would say that in our staffing guidance that we produce for schools, pregnant staff, I think, are already very well catered for in that regard. With regards risk assessments, I think Lawrence mentioned that the risk assessment will be updated, and the kind of understanding is when that goes out to a school, schools then have to consider it as a result of the updates and other material matters at the time, whether they then need to review and update their risk assessment. And we always advise schools when they're undertaking risk assessments, particularly when they're whole risk assessments for the school. Our advice does say that they should be consulting staff and local reps. That's it from me for now.
Thank you, Mark. So Stefan, then Matt.
Very briefly, it's a point of clarification. So Mark, you will be recommending schools that they should review their risk assessment in the light of these new developments.
That won't be my advice, Stefan, because I don't deal with the generic risk assessment. That's probably going to come from someone like Raj working with public health, who works with Lawrence. So that would be what would go out to schools. And what they'll highlight when they send out the revised risk assessment is what's changed. So it seems to me to be a natural progression from that step that schools would consider what other measures they have to take now to comply with the risk assessment.
Lawrence, can you add anything to that question?
Yeah, I think that's the case, and I will check and confirm.
Thank you, Lawrence. Matt?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to my questions. In terms of local infection rates, do we have that to hand? Fine if we don't, but I do want to ask just a straightforward yes, no. Will the council recommend face masks in the classroom or year group bubbles? Will they recommend schools to implement that regardless of, to go beyond government guidance?
So the rates, so the current rate in England is 423 per 100,000. In Ealing, it's lower than nationally at 369 per 100,000. The rate in London as a whole is slightly lower than that, around 325 per 100,000. The case rates in 5 to 10-year-olds have increased to around 800 per 100,000. And the case rates in 11 to 16-year-olds have remained fairly stable at around 570 per 100,000. In terms of the responses or the advice on masks and other activities, the proposed measures include further promoting the baseline measures such as hand hygiene, vaccine uptake and testing uptake, face coverings in secondary school communal areas and on transport, and for primary schools, face coverings for adults in communal areas. But as I mentioned, the response plan has been circulated for discussion, so the opportunity to feed back on that.
Julie?
Yeah, just to add, Matt, that you know, we meet with secondary heads in the next week or so, and you know, if there's a strong, you know, what we try to do with our secondary schools is invite them to make proposals as a group, and we will always listen to what they say. So if there's a very strong feeling that that they want masks to be introduced in the classroom, then obviously we will work with them. So you know, it's a consultation. You know, there are areas that the locality can influence because of particular circumstances and rates, but you know, decision making on on a more radical scale is limited at a local level. So just need to bear in mind what we can and what we can't do locally. So we respond to the local data, and we will have a nuanced response that is appropriate to that, and in consultation with schools and head teachers.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, so I can't see any more hands, so we'll move on to item 11. This is also a union side item, so who's going
that
to...
item is now redundant, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. And so item 12 is date of the next meeting, which is Wednesday, the 9th of February, 2022. Julie, you've still got your hand up. Is that a legacy hand?
Yes, it is a legacy hand, sorry.
So yes, the next meeting will be held on Wednesday, the 9th of February, 2022. And that's the end of the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.
Chair, will we know whether it will be in person or virtual, or are we waiting to find out how the development?
Are you kidding? Are you kidding?
We'll have to wait
Stefan?
and see how we get on with this latest variant, Stefan.
Indeed.
I think it would be great if we could meet in person, but we'll have to see.
Thank you. Sorry for the cheeky question.
Okay, thanks, Stefan. Okay, well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.